Hello. Uh, I'm Matthew Cronin. I'm a ML researcher at Sublime Security, and this is Ary Luthra, also an ML researcher, and we're here to talk to you today about trust and autonomy. So Bobby Filar couldn't be here today, but Ary and I are excited to talk to you about a new framework for evaluating security AI. So every vendor you'll see on the floor will tell you that their AI is autonomous, but all too often it's not clear what that actually means. Over the last 3 years, the language of AI has moved a lot faster than the engineering has. So here's our argument up front. Autonomy is not something that a vendor declares. Autonomy is something that you grant in increments, and every increment is paid for with evidence. So we'll spend a few minutes on how the market got here, and then move on to the useful part, which is two scales. One that clearly describes what a system is allowed to do by design, and one that helps to evaluate when a system has actually earned that autonomy in your environment. And we'll finish with 6 questions that you can take into your next vendor call. So take a look at this for a second, right? Same conference, 3 years, 3 completely different promises. In 2024, every booth was AI-powered, AI that assists, AI that summarizes, AI that helps your analysts. And then by 2025, the language has shifted completely. Suddenly, everyone had autonomous SOC analysts, self-healing infrastructure, and agentic everything. And now in 2026, it's no longer a feature story. It's an architecture story where the agentic SOC is the foundation. And the point is not that any of these phrases is wrong. The point is that the language has moved so fast and how little shared rigor has come with it. The language changed faster than the engineering, and when language changes that quickly, something predictable happens, and that's that the burden of proof starts to collapse. And that brings me to a scenario that probably feels familiar to some people in the room. You're in a procurement review, the demo looks great, attack caught, alerts triaged, everyone's impressed. But then someone asks the really important question, which is, how do we know this will work in our environment? And often the answer is, well, our AI was trained on billions of data points. But that answer alone should not be enough. Scale is not the same as validation. Telemetry is not the same as fit. And autonomy is often being marketed before it's demonstrated. And when that happens, the buyer really needs a better vocabulary for separating what is promised from what is actually proven. And we're not the first industry to face this challenge of the promise of autonomy versus the reality of human oversight. So the automotive industry spent a decade overpromising autonomy. Consumer vehicles were marketed as if full autonomy was right around the corner, robo-taxis would be everywhere, and aggressive timelines were everywhere. And what actually shipped? Well, mostly level 2, driver assist, steering and speed support, human very much still responsible. And these are all very valuable features in their own right, but it's not full autonomy. So yes, some genuinely autonomous systems do exist, but in much narrower conditions than marketing implied. Specific cities, specific roads, specific weather. In other words, not general autonomy, but bounded autonomy. And this is why the auto industry eventually needed SAE to step in and define levels of autonomy, not because the autonomy was fake, but because the language had outpaced the reality. And we're at that same moment in security AI right now. But a shared vocabulary is only half the answer. The other half of the problem is generalization. What truly performs impressively in one environment often breaks in another. So imagine cars trained in the ideal conditions of California or Arizona could immediately struggle in the British countryside or in the rain. Security has the same problem. Global telemetry is not the same as your environment, and in fact, it's barely an approximation. Broad enterprise coverage is not the same thing as your adversaries, your stack, or your regulatory environment. So when a vendor says, we trained on billions of data points, the only useful question is, how many of those data points look like us? And unlike the world of autonomous vehicles, what your environment looks like can change dramatically over time. when you pull your car into the garage at night, the highways don't actively adapt for tomorrow's commute to exploit your mistakes. And in security, the attacker does. And that's what makes security fundamentally adversarial. And once we accept that, it sort of becomes obvious that the term autonomous is currently being used far too loosely. And what we need is a shared understanding of what these systems actually do for us. So we'd like to propose a kind of equivalent of SAE levels for security AI, not as an industry standard, because we are nowhere near that kind of consensus, but as a shared vocabulary for the kind of conversations that you should be having with every vendor in this space. So level 1 here is AI assistance. The AI surfaces information and humans evaluate that and decide to act. It's a co-pilot, not an autopilot. Level 2 could be augmented AI. The system starts making recommendations about what you should do, but its reasoning is still there, and it still requires human approval before any action is taken. Transparent, testable, auditable. And this is where most vendors actually are present, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's very valuable. Level 3 would be supervised AI, where the system can act, but only within defined boundaries, and with humans reviewing asynchronously and fallback and rollback already designed in. And this is often where claims currently lie. Level 4 is conditional AI, where the system can operate pretty well autonomously within well-defined, well-tested scenarios. Human oversight sits at the boundaries of these scenarios, not at every individual action. And this is where marketing currently lands quite broadly. Level 5 would be full autonomy, but in security, this isn't really something I think we'll ever be able to buy off the shelf. This is something that's only really reached through demonstrated trust at every level before it. And this is something Ary's now going to go over with you guys.
Yeah, so that gives us like a shared taxonomy, but we need, I think, something more. You can't just have autonomy, but you need to have matched earned trust. Because even with a shared language, you won't, and you really shouldn't trust an autonomous framework claiming like, we have level 4 autonomy without seeing evidence inside your specific environment that suggests it deserves that autonomy. So the second question that buyers should be asking is not just how autonomous is it on some scale, but also, has it earned that right in my environment? Because in security, more autonomy is only good when it comes with evidence, visibility, control. And once you frame it that way, the question becomes obvious. It's like, how do buyers look for those 3 things? So let's start with evidence, because that's the most important one. And you ask the question, what evidence have all the vendors' systems actually provided that they are autonomous or at the level of autonomy that they claim? We end up seeing huge variance in that evidence. So on the left, you have like vendors shipping on intuition. So there's no real eval strategy. It's just setting up a model environment and showing demos. And when you ask questions like, how do I know this is going to work in my environment? You get like, oh, there was this customer story, or check out this demo. And it's kind of hand wavy, and there's no version comparison at all. And that's when you get something like, oh, our AI has caught thousands of real threats. But as you move up the evidence ladder, you get something that's more rigorous and repeatable, which is defined benchmarks, tracked metrics, and some sort of reproducible methodology that you can understand and that means something in your environments too. And then on the furthest, most advanced version of evidence ladder, you have something that is like feedback for evals. They're evaluating periodically at a certain cadence. They're publishing their performance curves, and they're improving their evals over time to keep up with adversarial drift. And that's the key point. Like, movement up the autonomy ladder that we mentioned before is not earned by like marketing claims. It's earned by providing this sort of evidence at every level before it. So this is where I think the industry has the mental model backwards. You can't just be like, oh, we're going to ship level 4 AI next quarter. it's not like a product roadmap or something you can put on like a release cycle. It's something that needs to be earned through progression of trust between vendor and customer. And that mainly happens through three things: the evidence, as mentioned before, and how do you know that that's working when it's running? That's like operational evidence. Like while it's running, can I look at something to see that it's working? And when stuff does go wrong, when stuff does go wrong, how does the human stay in control? That's like your oversight model. So this is only really possible when your system is built from the ground up to be transparent, explainable, and auditable. And that's what makes black box autonomous AI systems so frustrating to work with and inherently difficult to trust. Because if you can't verify that something is running and you can't view the reasoning, you can't really trust it. And when you can't trust it, you won't grant it more environment in your autonomy. Trust really is that forcing function for granting more autonomy for customers. So at each level, you need to show those crystallized evidence, operational evidence, and human auditability across each level as you move through the autonomy ladder. So at level 1, you might show something like a retrieval benchmark for how you know it works, and decision traces for how a human stays in control. But as you move down the autonomy ladder, you might have model monitoring and detection and rollback in the human staying in control. So each level requires a new set of evidence across new set of evidence at each level. So where does this leave us? I want to leave you guys with 6 real questions that you can ask customers, security vendors, to evaluate their claims around having an autonomous system, right? So, you could ask something like, show me where your product sits on the autonomy scale and what happens at the boundary. What happens when stuff goes wrong? Has it been red teamed internally or externally? As well as, what's your evaluation methodology beyond just your claimed results? And what options do I have when something goes wrong at 3 a.m. or a regulator asks me like why I made a specific decision? Do I have transparency and auditability there? And what these questions will basically allow you to do is place that security vendor on the autonomy scale and understand what level they're operating at, and more importantly, what level they're not operating at. And beyond that, like, it'll give you what evidence they've earned in real environments, hopefully ones that look like yours, that justify granting it that level of autonomy. And obviously, tangentially, when things go wrong, what level of auditability do you have? And like, what level of operational responsibility do I have regulatorily to my customers as well as regulatorily? Yeah. So if a vendor can't answer these in detail, you can place them where they really are. So that really is your answer. So just taking a quick step back, I want to make sure that this is not a case against AI and security. It's more like the opposite. AI is the best tool we have to catch up with attacker speed as defenders, and we're going to need it. But the path to meaningful autonomy is not built on hype or black box magical AI that's kind of hand-wavy. It needs to be built on trust earned through visibility, explainability, auditability, and real evidence. And that's how we get to those levels of autonomy that really matter. Thank you, guys. Do you guys have any questions?